The evening air carried a chill as Michael Chen pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. It wasn't enough for the early October weather, but it was all he had. His fingers, long and nimble, fumbled with the employee entrance code before the heavy metal door of Élysée restaurant swung open. "Cutting it close tonight, aren't we?" The hostess, Lily, glanced up from her station with a knowing smile. She'd been working at the high-end restaurant since before it became the favorite dining spot for the city's elite. "Bus broke down again," Michael replied, hurrying toward the staff room. 5 minutes and I'll be ready." He wasn't actually late. Michael was never late, but he liked to arrive 30 minutes before his shift began. Today he'd only managed 15. The staff room was cramped but organized, with metal lockers lining one wall and a small table where 2 servers were already studying the evening's specials. Michael nodded politely as he opened his locker, quickly changing into the crisp white shirt and black vest that marked the waitstaff at Élysée. "You're on Section 3 tonight," called out Rob, the floor manager, poking his head through the doorway. "And heads up, we've got the Morrison Group taking up the entire West Wing for some kind of business celebration. Big money, big tips if we play it right." Michael nodded, fastening his black bow tie with practiced movements. "Got it. Any special requests from them?" "Just the usual VIP treatment." "Oh, and they asked about the piano." "Wondering if we'd have someone playing tonight." The mention of the piano made Michael's hands pause briefly. In the main dining room of Élysée stood a beautiful grand piano, polished to a mirror shine but rarely played. It was mostly for show, a decorative piece that added to the restaurant's sophisticated atmosphere. "What did you tell them?" Michael asked, trying to sound casual. "That it's just for decoration. We don't have a pianist on staff." Rob shrugged. "Shame, really. That thing probably cost more than I make in 2 years." Michael said nothing, finishing with his tie and smoothing down his vest. No one at Élysée knew about his past. No one knew that before he was a waiter carrying plates of overpriced food to wealthy patrons. He had once been on track to become a concert pianist. 8 months ago, he had been studying at the Carson Institute of Music on a full scholarship. 8 months ago, his mother hadn't yet received her diagnosis. 8 months ago, his life had made sense. "Earth to Michael," said Rob, snapping his fingers. "You with us? I need you focused tonight. These people tip well, but they can be demanding." "Sorry," Michael said, shaking away the memories. "I'm focused. Section 3, Morrison Group, VIP treatment. I've got it." As he left the staff room, he caught a glimpse of the piano through the dining room doors. Its sleek black surface gleamed under the soft lighting. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it would feel like to sit on that bench, to place his fingers on those keys again. But that was a different life now. These days, his hands carried trays, not melodies. By 7 o'clock, Élysée was buzzing with activity. The regular dining area was nearly full, but the West Wing had been transformed for the private party. Extra flowers adorned every surface, champagne flowed freely, and the guests arrived in outfits that probably cost more than Michael's monthly rent. "The Morrison Group," Lily whispered as she passed by Michael, who was arranging water glasses at his station. "They just closed some massive tech deal. Heard it was worth 9 figures. Michael nodded, taking in the information. It explained the extravagance. These weren't just wealthy people having dinner. These were wealthy people celebrating becoming even wealthier. As the guests began to fill the West Wing, Michael slipped into the professional persona he'd perfected over months of service. Back straight, voice clear but not too loud, present when needed and invisible when not. He took drink orders, explained menu items, and navigated the growing crowd with practiced ease. An hour into service, he noticed a man watching him from one of the center tables. The man was in his 50s with gray hair styled perfectly, and a suit that seemed tailored down to the millimeter. Something about his gaze made Michael uncomfortable. It was too calculating, too amused, like he was watching a show rather than being served dinner. "That's Thomas Whitaker," said another server who noticed Michael's glance. "Big shot investment banker. Be extra careful with that one. He complained about the temperature of his water last time he was here." As if on cue, Whitaker raised a finger to summon service. Michael approached smoothly, professional smile in place. "Yes, sir? How can I help you?" "This wine," Whitaker said, gesturing to his glass without looking at Michael, "isn't what I ordered." Michael knew this wasn't true. He had brought exactly what Whitaker had requested, an expensive Bordeaux that the restaurant had specifically opened for the event. "I apologize, sir. You ordered the 2015 Chateau Margaux, correct? I ordered something drinkable, Whitaker replied loud enough for his companions to hear. A few of them chuckled. This isn't it. Michael maintained his composure. I'll be happy to bring the wine list again, sir, so you can select something more to your liking. Whitaker waved dismissively. No need. Just bring me the Lafite Rothschild instead. A bottle that cost twice as much as the already expensive Bordeaux. Michael nodded and retreated to the wine cellar where the sommelier raised an eyebrow at the request. Whitaker giving you trouble? The sommelier asked as he carefully selected the requested bottle. Nothing unusual, Michael replied. He was used to demanding customers by now. What bothered him was the way Whitaker had looked at him, not as a server but as some form of entertainment. When Michael returned with the new wine, the party had grown louder. The deal they were celebrating must have been significant indeed, because no one seemed concerned about the flow of expensive alcohol or the plates of barely touched food. As he poured Whitaker's wine, Michael noticed the man watching him again, this time whispering something to the woman beside him. They both laughed and Michael felt his neck grow warm. He focused on the task at hand, making sure not to spill a drop of the precious liquid. Throughout the evening, Michael continued to serve his section flawlessly, but he could feel Whitaker's eyes following him occasionally. It made him uneasy, but he pushed the feeling aside. The night would end eventually, and he needed this job. During a brief moment of calm, Michael found himself near the piano. Without thinking, he ran his finger lightly along its closed lid, leaving a small trail in the thin layer of dust that had settled there. No one had played it in months, maybe longer. What a waste, he thought. You like the piano? The voice startled him. It was the restaurant owner, Mr. Hayes, a man Michael rarely spoke with directly. It's beautiful, Michael said simply, pulling his hand away. Came with the building, Hayes explained, running his palm over the glossy surface. Previous owner was some kind of music enthusiast. I keep it tuned, but honestly it's just for show. Ads class, you know? Michael nodded, though the idea of a piano being just for show had always struck him as sad. To him, instruments were meant to be played to create something living and breathing. You play? Hayes asked, more out of politeness than genuine interest. Michael hesitated. I used to, he said finally. A long time ago. It wasn't a long time ago at all, but it felt that way. His old life at the Music Institute seemed distant now, like someone else's memory. Hayes nodded absently, already distracted by something else happening in the restaurant. Well, back to work, he said, moving away. Michael returned to his section where the celebration was reaching its peak. Glasses clinked, laughter grew louder, and the atmosphere became increasingly relaxed as alcohol lowered inhibitions and loosened tongues. As the night progressed, Michael noticed Whitaker becoming more animated, his gestures broader, his voice louder. The man was clearly drunk, but it was a controlled kind of drunkenness, the type where someone was still aware of their surroundings but had abandoned their usual restraint. It happened as Michael was clearing plates from a nearby table. Whitaker suddenly stood, glass in hand, and called for attention. The room gradually quieted, all eyes turning to the investment banker. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, voice carrying across the room, I'd like to propose a toast to our incredible success. The Morrison-Apex merger is just the beginning of what I predict will be the most profitable venture in our company's history. Cheers and applause followed. Michael continued his work, trying to be invisible as always. And, Whitaker continued, his gaze now falling on Michael, I think we deserve some entertainment to mark the occasion, don't you? More cheers. Michael kept his eyes down, focusing on the plates he was stacking. This fine establishment has that beautiful piano, Whitaker said, pointing toward the instrument in the corner. It seems a shame to let it sit silent on such a special night. Michael felt a chill run through him. He didn't like where this was heading. Whitaker's eyes locked onto Michael, a mischievous glint visible even from across the room. You there, waiter? Yes, you. Come here a moment. The room fell quiet as Michael placed his stack of plates down and approached Whitaker's table. He kept his expression neutral, professional, though his heart had begun to race. Sir, he asked, hands clasped behind his back. Tell me, Whitaker said, a small smile playing on his lips. Do you play the piano? Michael felt every eye in the room on him. The question hung in the air between him and Thomas Whitaker, whose smirk had grown wider. I asked you a question, young man, Whitaker said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Do you play the piano?" For a split second, Michael considered telling the truth. Yes, he wanted to say. "I've played since I was 5. I was on track to become a concert pianist before life got in the way." Instead, he swallowed hard and gave the answer that would cause the least trouble. "No, sir, I don't." Whitaker's eyebrows rose in mock disappointment. "That's a shame." He turned to address the room. "Wouldn't it be wonderful to have some live music for our celebration?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Michael took this as his cue to step away, but Whitaker wasn't finished with him. "Wait a moment," Whitaker said, his voice stopping Michael in his tracks. "I have an idea." Michael turned back, keeping his expression neutral despite the knot forming in his stomach. "Even if you don't play," Whitaker continued, "surely you could manage to press a few keys for our amusement. Come now, it would be entertaining." A woman at Whitaker's table giggled. "Oh, Thomas, leave the poor boy alone." But Whitaker waved her concern away. "Nonsense, Veronica. We're celebrating. A little entertainment from the staff is perfectly reasonable." He turned his attention back to Michael. "What do you say? Give us a little show at the piano?" Michael's collar suddenly felt too tight. He glanced around for Rob or Mr. Hayes, hoping for some intervention, but Rob was nowhere to be seen, and Mr. Hayes was engaged in conversation with another group of guests. "I'm sorry, sir," Michael said carefully. "I'm afraid I wouldn't be very entertaining. I should get back to $50, Whitaker interrupted, pulling out his wallet. $50 just to sit down and play to anything. He placed a $50 bill on the table. "Consider it a tip in advance." Michael stared at the money. $50 would help with his mother's medication this month. But the humiliation of fumbling through a poor performance in front of all these people. Before he could respond, Whitaker added another bill. $100. The room had grown quieter. Other guests were watching now, intrigued by the unfolding drama. "Thomas," another man at the table said, "perhaps we should let the waiter get back to his job." But Whitaker's eyes remained fixed on Michael. $200, he said, adding more bills to the stack. $200 just to play a simple tune. Even a child could do that. Michael's hands clenched at his sides. The comment stung more than Whitaker could know. The money would be helpful, very helpful, but at what cost to his dignity? "I think the young man has made it clear he's not interested," said an older woman from a nearby table. She had silver hair styled elegantly and wore a deep blue dress that caught the light when she moved. Whitaker turned to her with an exaggerated bow. Victoria Hargrove, always the defender of the common folk. He laughed, but there was an edge to it. "I'm simply offering him an opportunity to earn a generous tip. Victoria Hargrove." The name rang a bell in Michael's mind, but he couldn't place it immediately. He was too focused on finding a way out of this increasingly uncomfortable situation. "Mr. Whitaker," Michael began again. "I appreciate the offer, but $500, Whitaker declared loudly, slapping more bills onto the growing pile. $500 to play one song. Final offer. A hush fell over the room. $500 was nearly half of Michael's monthly rent. It was money that could make a real difference for him and his mother right now. Mr. Hayes had finally noticed the commotion and was making his way over, a concerned frown on his face. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between Whitaker and Michael. Whitaker smiled broadly. "Just having a bit of fun, Hayes. I've offered your waiter here $500 to play a little tune on that piano of yours. Seems a reasonable request during our celebration, don't you think?" Mr. Hayes's expression made it clear he didn't think it was reasonable at all, but Whitaker was one of the restaurant's most valuable customers. Michael could see the conflict playing out on his boss's face, the desire to protect his employees' dignity versus the need to keep a high-spending client happy. "Michael is here to serve food and drinks. Mr. Whitaker," Hayes said carefully, "the piano is really just for decoration." "Oh, come now," Whitaker interrupted. $500 for 2 minutes of his time? I'd say that's a fair trade. He turned to address the room again. "Wouldn't you all agree?" Several guests nodded, seemingly entertained by the whole scenario. Others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Mr. Hayes hesitated, then turned to Michael with an apologetic look. "It's entirely up to you, Michael," he said quietly. "You don't have to do this if you don't want to." But the implication was clear in his eyes. It would be better for everyone if Michael just went along with it. Better for the restaurant, better for Mr. Hayes, better for the evening to proceed smoothly. Michael looked at the stack of bills on the table. $500 that he desperately needed. He thought of his mother's face that morning, tired from her latest round of treatments, still managing to smile as she told him not to worry so much about the medical bills. "Fine," he said finally. "One song." Whitaker clapped his hands together in triumph. "Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a performer." Michael made his way to the piano, heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't touched a piano in 8 months, not since the day he'd withdrawn from the Carson Institute to move back home and care for his mother. He'd avoided even walking past music stores, the sight of pianos and windows too painful a reminder of what he'd given up. The grand piano loomed before him now, its lid propped open to display the intricate hammers and strings within. Michael hesitated before the bench, suddenly aware of how quiet the room had become. "Come on then," called Whitaker, clearly enjoying himself. "Let's hear what you can do." Michael sat down slowly, adjusting the bench out of habit. His fingers hovered over the keys, and for a terrible moment he worried they wouldn't remember what to do, that the muscle memory built over thousands of hours of practice had somehow vanished during his months away. What should he play? If he was going to humiliate himself for Whitaker's amusement, he might as well go all in. The thought of deliberately playing poorly crossed his mind, mashing random keys together, playing chopsticks like a child. But something in him rebelled against the idea. He couldn't bring himself to disrespect the instrument that way even now. Whitaker's voice cut through his thoughts. "We're waiting," he said, impatience creeping into his tone. "Unless you're having second thoughts about that $500? Michael closed his eyes. He thought of his mother, of the mounting bills, of the dreams he'd put on hold. Then he placed his hands on the keys. He would play something simple, something that wouldn't reveal too much of his training, but wouldn't be a complete embarrassment either. His fingers settled into position for Debussy's Clair de Lune, beautiful but not overly technical. He could play it convincingly without showing his full ability, but as his fingers pressed down on the first notes, something unexpected happened. The sound that emerged from the piano was rich and resonant, filling the dining room with a clarity that surprised him. The piano was perfectly in tune, its action responsive under his touch in a way that felt like greeting an old friend. Without consciously deciding to, Michael's approach shifted. His fingers moved with greater confidence, shaping the familiar phrases with the sensitivity that had once earned him a full scholarship. The music flowed from him naturally, as if the intervening months had never happened. He forgot about Whitaker, about the restaurant guests, about the $500. For those few minutes there was only the music, the gentle rise and fall of Debussy's masterpiece unfolding beneath his hands. When he finished the piece, the final notes hanging in the air, Michael opened his eyes. He was startled to find the room completely silent. No one spoke, no one moved. Every face was turned toward him, expressions ranging from surprise to confusion to outright shock. Whitaker's smug smile had vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief. He stared at Michael as if seeing him for the first time. "That," Whitaker began, then seemed at a loss for words. Victoria Hargrove, the silver-haired woman who had spoken up earlier, was looking at Michael with intense curiosity. She rose from her seat and approached the piano slowly. "Young man," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "where did you learn to play like that?" Michael stood up from the bench, suddenly self-conscious again. "I took some lessons when I was younger," he said vaguely, not meeting her eyes. "Some lessons," she repeated, clearly not believing him. "What's your name?" "Michael Chen," he answered automatically. Something flashed in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. "Chen, were you by any chance a student at the Carson Institute of Music?" The question caught him off guard. "How did you know that?" She smiled, a warm, genuine expression that contrasted sharply with Whitaker's earlier mockery. "Because, Mr. Chen, I'm on the board of directors there, and if I'm not mistaken, you were the recipient of the Young Artists Award 2 years ago. Your Chopin was remarkable." Now Michael recognized her. Victoria Hargrove, the renowned conductor who had presented him with that award, who had shaken his hand and told him he had a promising future. He'd been so distracted by Whitaker's challenge that he hadn't made the connection. "What in the world," she asked quietly, "is a pianist of your caliber doing waiting tables?" Michael stood frozen by the piano, Victoria Hargrove's question hanging in the air between them. The restaurant had fallen completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had paused their work, peering through the service doors to watch the scene unfold. Michael began, but the words stuck in his throat. How could he explain his situation without sounding like he was asking for pity? He glanced at Mr. Hayes, whose expression had transformed from apologetic to astonished. Victoria seemed to sense his discomfort. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private," she suggested, her voice gentle but firm. Before Michael could respond, Whitaker rose from his seat, the stack of bills still on the table in front of him. "Well," he said, attempting to regain his composure. That was certainly unexpected. His tone had lost its mocking edge, replaced with something that almost sounded like respect. "It seems I've gotten more entertainment than I bargained for." He picked up the money and approached Michael, holding out the $500. "A deal's a deal. You've earned this." Michael hesitated, then took the money with a slight nod. "Thank you, sir." "No," Whitaker said, surprising everyone, including himself. "Thank you. That was quite remarkable." The atmosphere in the room had shifted. What had begun as an attempt to embarrass a waiter had transformed into something else entirely. Some of the guests were still watching Michael with curious eyes, while others whispered among themselves. Mr. Hayes cleared his throat. "Michael, why don't you take your break now? I'm sure Ms. Hargrove would like to speak with you." He turned to Victoria with a slight bow. "You're welcome to use my office for privacy." Victoria smiled appreciatively. "Thank you, that would be perfect." Michael folded the bills carefully and placed them in his pocket. "I should finish serving my section first." "Nonsense," Mr. Hayes interrupted. "Peter can cover for you." He gestured to another waiter who nodded in agreement. As Michael followed Victoria toward the back of the restaurant, he could feel the eyes of the guests tracking his movement. The woman who had giggled at Whitaker's initial request now looked embarrassed. A few others nodded respectfully as he passed. Mr. Hayes's office was small but tidy, with a desk, 2 chairs, and a wall of photographs showing the restaurant owner with various celebrities who had dined at Élysée over the years. "Please, sit down," Victoria said, taking one of the chairs. Michael sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Now that the adrenaline of performing was wearing off, he felt exposed, vulnerable. For months he'd kept his past life separate from his present one, and in a matter of minutes that careful division had collapsed. "You disappeared," Victoria said simply. "The faculty at Carson were quite concerned when you suddenly withdrew. Professor Abramson in particular spoke highly of your potential." Michael's throat tightened at the mention of his former mentor. "I didn't have a choice." Victoria waited, giving him space to continue if he wished. When he didn't immediately elaborate, she spoke again. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not comfortable sharing, Michael. But I have to say, hearing you play tonight was, well, it was a revelation. Your technique is still impeccable, but there was something more, a depth of feeling that wasn't there 2 years ago." Michael looked down at his hands. Waiter's hands now, slightly calloused from carrying hot plates, a small burn mark on his right thumb from a mishap with the coffee machine last week. But they were still pianist's hands, too, with long fingers and strong joints, muscle memory intact despite the months of disuse. "My mother got sick," he said finally, the words coming out more abruptly than he intended. "Cancer stage 3. I'm her only family here. My father left when I was young, and our relatives are all back in Taiwan." The explanation tumbled out of him now, like water through a broken dam. The medical bill started piling up, even with insurance. I couldn't focus on my studies and take care of her at the same time, so I withdrew. Got this job. The hours are long, but the tips are good, and it pays the rent. Victoria listened without interrupting, her expression compassionate but not pitying. "I'm very sorry to hear about your mother," she said when he finished. "How is she doing now?" "Better, actually. The latest round of treatment seems to be working. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." Michael smiled slightly, the first genuine smile since he'd sat down at the piano. "She's tough." "Tougher than me," Victoria nodded thoughtfully. "And the piano? Have you played it all these past months?" Michael shook his head. "Tonight was the first time. I couldn't. It was too painful a reminder of what I'd given up." "And yet you played beautifully," Victoria observed, "as if you'd never stopped." Michael shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "It was just Debussy. Just Debussy, Victoria repeated with a small laugh. Most pianists work for years to play Clair de Lune with half the sensitivity you showed tonight. She leaned forward slightly. Michael, talent like yours doesn't come along often. It shouldn't be wasted serving drinks to people like Thomas Whitaker. I'm not wasting it, Michael said, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. I'm doing what I need to do right now. For my mother. Victoria held up her hands. Of course. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. Family comes first, I understand that completely. She paused, considering her next words carefully. But perhaps there's a way you could continue to help your mother while also nurturing your gift. Michael raised an eyebrow, skeptical but curious. The symphony has a special scholarship program, Victoria explained, for exceptional musicians facing hardship. It includes a monthly stipend, flexible rehearsal schedules, and medical insurance that covers dependents. She smiled at Michael's surprised expression. We created it specifically because too many talented young artists have to abandon their dreams due to circumstances beyond their control. I don't know what to say, Michael stammered. You don't have to say anything right now, Victoria assured him. Here's my card. Think about it, discuss it with your mother, and call me if you're interested. She pulled a business card from her purse and placed it on the desk between them. Michael picked up the card, running his thumb over the embossed lettering, Victoria Hargrove, Artistic Director, City Symphony Orchestra. Why would you do this for me? He asked, genuine confusion in his voice. You barely know me. Victoria's expression grew serious. Because music matters, Michael. In a world full of Thomas Whitakers, counting their millions and treating others as entertainment, music reminds us of our shared humanity. She gestured toward the dining room. What happened out there tonight, that moment when everyone in that room fell silent? Truly listening, that's rare and precious. The world needs more of those moments, not fewer. Michael tucked the card carefully into his pocket alongside Whitaker's $500. Thank you, he said simply. I'll think about it. Victoria stood, signaling the end of their conversation. That's all I ask. She moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Michael, if you do call, be prepared to play something more challenging than Debussy. Rachmaninoff, perhaps? The corner of Michael's mouth twitched upward. I used to know his Piano Concerto No. 2 fairly well. I suspected as much, Victoria said with a knowing smile. When they returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had largely returned to normal. The Morrison Group's celebration continued, though with a noticeably different energy. Michael noticed several guests glancing his way with newfound respect as he resumed his duties. Even Whitaker seemed changed. When Michael approached to clear his table, the banker looked up with an expression that might almost be called contrite. That was quite the performance, Whitaker said, his voice lacking its earlier condescension. Where did you study? Carson Institute, Michael replied simply. Whitaker nodded. Prestigious place. My niece applied there but didn't get in. He hesitated, then added, I apologize if I put you on the spot earlier. It was inconsiderate of me. Michael was taken aback by the unexpected apology. It's fine, sir. No harm done. Still, Whitaker persisted. It was wrong of me to assume. He trailed off, seemingly unable to complete the thought aloud. To assume that because Michael was a waiter, he couldn't possibly possess extraordinary talent. Will there be anything else, sir? Michael asked, professionally returning the conversation to familiar territory. Whitaker shook his head. No, thank you. As Michael turned to leave, Whitaker spoke again. Chen, he called, causing Michael to pause. Whatever your circumstances are, don't give up on your music. The world has enough bankers. He gestured around the table at his colleagues, who chuckled good-naturedly. What you have is special. Michael nodded, unsure how to respond to this unexpected show of support from the man who had tried to humiliate him only an hour before. Throughout the remainder of his shift, Michael moved through his tasks with a strange new awareness. Each time he passed the piano, he felt its presence more keenly, like the pull of a magnet. The keys seemed to call to him, reminding him of a part of himself he had tried to bury. As he served dessert to a table near the back, he overheard snippets of conversation about himself. Can't believe he's just a waiter. Victoria Hargrove was clearly impressed. I wonder why he's not performing professionally. The comments should have bothered him, but strangely they didn't. Perhaps because for the first time in months, He had allowed himself to be fully seen, not just as Michael the reliable waiter, but as Michael Chen, pianist. When the last guest had departed and the restaurant staff began their closing routine, Rob approached him with a curious expression. "So," Rob said, leaning against the bar, "were you ever going to tell any of us that you're basically a piano prodigy?" Michael shrugged, wiping down a table. "It never came up." "Never came up?" Rob repeated incredulously. "We've talked about music dozens of times. I've shown you my terrible guitar playing videos." "Sorry," Michael said with a small smile. It wasn't relevant to who I am now." Rob shook his head in disbelief. "Well, it's relevant now. Hayes is already talking about having you play regularly. Says it would be great for business." He paused, studying Michael's face. "Unless that's not what you want?" Michael glanced toward the piano, gleaming softly under the dimmed lights. For so long he had forced himself to look away from instruments like this, from the life he thought he had lost. But tonight something had shifted. Playing again, feeling the keys beneath his fingers, the music flowing through him. It had awakened something he had tried desperately to suppress. "I don't know what I want yet," he answered honestly. "But I'm starting to remember who I used to be." That night, as Michael walked home through the quiet streets, Victoria's business card seemed to burn in his pocket, a small rectangle of possibility. For the first time since his mother's diagnosis, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he might not have to choose between caring for her and pursuing his passion. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to do both. 2 weeks had passed since the night Michael played the piano at Élysée, and his life had begun to change in subtle but significant ways. The apartment was quiet when he entered. Careful not to make too much noise in case his mother was sleeping, he placed his keys on the small table by the door and hung up his jacket. "Michael? Is that you?" His mother's voice called from the living room. "It's me," he replied, walking toward her voice. Lin Chen was sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, a book open on her lap. She looked better today. Her cheeks had more color and the dark circles under her eyes had faded slightly. The latest treatment was working, slowly but surely. "How was work?" she asked as he bent down to kiss her cheek. "Good," he said, sitting on the couch across from her. "Mr. Hayes asked me to play the piano again tonight." Lynn smiled. Since the night of the Morrison Group party, Michael had begun playing the piano at Élysée twice a week. Mr. Hayes had been quick to capitalize on his employees' unexpected talent, advertising live piano nights that had already boosted business significantly. "And how did it feel?" she asked. Michael considered the question. "Good," he said again, but with more certainty this time. "It felt right." Lynn nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. She had been the one who had encouraged his talent from the beginning, scraping together money for lessons when he was young, celebrating each small achievement along his musical journey. She had also been the one who cried the hardest when he told her he was leaving Carson to take care of her. "Did you bring it?" she asked. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out Victoria Hargrove's business card, slightly worn around the edges from being carried for 2 weeks. "You haven't called her yet," Lynn observed. It wasn't a question. "I wanted to talk to you about it first," Michael said. "Really talk about it." Lynn closed her book and set it aside. "I'm listening." Michael took a deep breath. "Victoria Hargrove offered me a chance to audition for a special scholarship with the symphony. If I get it, it would include a stipend and health insurance that would cover your treatments." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But it would mean going back to music full-time. The rehearsals, the performances, the practice hours. The life you were meant to have," Lynn finished for him. Michael shook his head. "Don't say that. Taking care of you is important too." "Of course it is," Lynn agreed. "But Michael, watching you give up your dream because of me," her voice caught. "That has been the hardest part of being sick." "Mom..." "No, let me finish," she interrupted gently. "When you were 5 years old, I took you to that community center where they had an old upright piano. Do you remember?" Michael nodded. It was one of his earliest memories. You walked straight to it, climbed up on the bench, and started pressing keys, not banging them like other children would, but pressing them carefully, listening to each sound. Lynn's eyes grew distant with the memory. "The woman running the center saw you and asked if you'd had lessons. When I said no, she told me it would be a crime not to nurture such natural curiosity." "Mrs. Winters," Michael said, remembering the kind older woman who had given him his first informal lessons before recommending him to a proper teacher. Yes, Lynn smiled. She said you had a gift. I didn't understand what that meant then, not really, but I saw how you came alive when you played, how the music seemed to flow from somewhere deep inside you. She reached out and took his hand. That gift is part of who you are, Michael. It doesn't disappear just because you've set it aside for a while. Michael squeezed her hand. I don't want you to worry about anything except getting better. And I don't want you to put your life on hold because of my illness, Lynn countered. If this scholarship could help us both, give you back your music and help with my treatment, why wouldn't we try for it? Michael was silent for a moment. What if I'm not good enough anymore? It's been almost a year since I practiced seriously. Lynn laughed softly. After what happened at the restaurant? From what you've told me, you impressed a room full of people, including the artistic director of the City Symphony. She tapped the business card in his hand. She wouldn't have given you this if she didn't think you were good enough. Michael turned the card over in his fingers. I'd need to prepare for the audition. I'd need access to a piano for more than just the nights I play at Élysée. So ask Mr. Hayes if you can practice there during off hours, Lynn suggested, or see if Carson would let you use their practice rooms. Your professor, what was his name, Abramson? He always believed in you. You've thought this through, Michael said, surprised. Lynn smiled. I've had 2 weeks to think about it while you've been carrying that card around. Her expression grew more serious. Michael, when I get better, and I will get better, what then? Will you go back to music? Or will you keep waiting tables because it's safer? Less risky than putting your heart out there again. The question hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't allowed himself to think that far ahead, focusing instead on the day-to-day challenges of bills and treatments and work schedules. I don't know, he admitted. I think you do. Lynn said gently. I think you're just afraid. Michael couldn't deny it. The thought of returning to music seriously, of being judged and possibly found wanting, terrified him in a way that his mother's illness hadn't. Cancer was an external enemy they could fight together. But facing his own potential, the possibility of either failure or success, that was something he had to confront alone. Call her, Lynn urged, nodding toward the card. What do you have to lose? Michael looked at his mother's face, tired but determined, fragile but strong, and made his decision. Okay, he said. I'll call her tomorrow. The next morning, Michael arrived at Élysée 2 hours before his shift was scheduled to begin. He had called Victoria Hargrove's office earlier and left a message, feeling a strange mix of terror and excitement as he did. So Mr. Hayes had been surprisingly supportive when Michael asked if he could use the restaurant's piano to practice during off hours. I'm not paying you for the practice time, Mr. Hayes had said gruffly, but the piano's just sitting there anyway. And it's good for business having you play. Customers are already asking which nights you'll be here. Now, as Michael sat at the piano in the empty restaurant, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in months. He flexed his fingers, placed them on the keys, and began to play scales. Basic exercises he had once found tedious but now approached with renewed appreciation. After warming up, he turned his attention to more challenging pieces. If he was going to audition for Victoria Hargrove, he needed to showcase his technical skill as well as his musicality. He began working through Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, the piece she had specifically mentioned. The restaurant staff began arriving as he practiced, some stopping to listen for a moment before continuing with their opening duties. Lily, the hostess, brought him a cup of coffee during a break. That sounds amazing, she said, placing the mug next to the piano. Hard to believe you're the same guy who's been serving tables with us all this time. Michael smiled his thanks. I'm not sure I am the same guy anymore, he said, realizing the truth of it as he spoke. By the time his shift began, Michael had worked through the most challenging passages of the concerto, identifying areas that needed more attention. His fingers were sore but in a satisfying way, like muscles that had been dormant too long finally being used again. Midway through the dinner service, his phone buzzed in his pocket. When he had a moment between tables, he checked it and saw a voicemail from a number he didn't recognize. He stepped into the break room to listen. Hello, Michael, this is Victoria Hargrove returning your call. Her voice was as clear and confident as he remembered. I'm delighted to hear from you. If you're still interested in the scholarship program, I'd like to arrange an audition for next week. Please call me back at this number to discuss details. Michael leaned against the wall, heart racing. This was real. This was happening. When he returned to the dining room, there was a new energy in his step. He moved between tables with practiced efficiency, but his mind was elsewhere, already preparing, already rehearsing. As the evening progressed, Michael noticed a familiar face enter the restaurant. Thomas Whitaker, alone this time, requesting a table near the piano. When Michael approached to take his order, Whitaker looked up with what seemed like genuine pleasure. "Michael," he said, "I was hoping you'd be here tonight. Are you playing later?" "Not officially," Michael replied. "I only play on Thursdays and Saturdays now." Whitaker nodded, looking slightly disappointed. "I see. Well, I've been telling people about your performance at our event. Quite a few of my colleagues have come by on your playing nights." "Thank you," Michael said, surprised by the man's continued interest. "That's very kind of you." Whitaker waved away the thanks. "Not at all. Talent should be recognized." He hesitated, then asked, "Have you given any thought to pursuing music professionally again? Victoria Hargrove seemed quite taken with your playing." Michael was struck by how different this Whitaker was from the arrogant man who had tried to humiliate him. "Actually," he said, "I just heard back from her today. I'm auditioning for a scholarship program with the symphony next week." "Excellent," Whitaker exclaimed, seeming genuinely pleased. "That's excellent news." He studied Michael's face for a moment. "You know, I've been thinking about that night a great deal, about how quick I was to judge you based solely on your job." Michael didn't know how to respond to this unexpected confession. "The truth is," Whitaker continued, "I was showing off for my colleagues, at your expense." He looked down at his menu, then back up at Michael. "I'd like to make amends if possible." "That's really not necessary, Mr. Whitaker," Michael assured him. "It all worked out in the end." "Nevertheless," Whitaker persisted, "I'd like to help. The symphony scholarship is good, but medical treatments are expensive. I know something about that. My wife had breast cancer 5 years ago." Michael was startled by this personal revelation. "If you're comfortable with it," Whitaker said, "I'd like to make a donation to the Carson Institute in your name. An anonymous one, specifically to help talented students facing financial hardship due to family medical situations." Michael stared at him, at a loss for words. "You don't have to answer now," Whitaker added quickly. "Think about it. Here's my card." He pulled out a business card and handed it to Michael. "And whatever you decide, I wish you the very best with your audition." As Michael took the card, he marveled at how unpredictable life could be. Just weeks ago, this man had been a symbol of everything he resented: privilege, arrogance, thoughtlessness. Now he was offering to help others in Michael's situation. "Thank you," Michael said, tucking the card into his pocket alongside Victoria's. "I'll think about it." Later that night, as he closed up the restaurant, Michael sat down at the piano one more time. The dining room was empty, chairs placed upside down on tables, the soft hum of the dishwasher in the background the only sound. He played a few notes of Rachmaninoff, then paused, letting his hands rest on the keys. In just 2 weeks, his life had changed direction in ways he couldn't have imagined. He had gone from hiding his talent to embracing it again, from seeing only obstacles to recognizing opportunities. The path ahead wasn't clear yet. The audition might not go well. The scholarship might not be enough. His mother's health could take another turn. But for the first time in nearly a year, Michael allowed himself to hope. Not just for survival, but for something more. For a life where he didn't have to choose between duty and passion, between taking care of others and being true to himself. He began to play again, the music filling the empty restaurant with possibility. 6 months later, Michael stood backstage at the city concert hall, adjusting his bow tie nervously. Tonight marked his debut as a featured soloist with the symphony, performing the very piece that had been in his mind the night Whitaker had challenged him to play, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The journey to this moment had been filled with unexpected turns, hard work, and more than a few sleepless nights. The audition for Victoria's scholarship program had been both terrifying and exhilarating. He had practiced for hours in the empty restaurant, his fingers remembering patterns they had once known so well, his body gradually reacquainting itself with the physical demands of performing at a high level. When the day finally arrived, Michael had played his heart out for Victoria and a panel of 3 other judges. He performed Bach, Chopin, and of course portions of the Rachmaninoff Concerto. When he finished, Victoria had smiled that same warm smile he remembered from the night at Élysée. "Welcome back to the world of music, Mr. Chen," she had said simply. The scholarship had been even better than promised. Not only did it provide a monthly stipend and health insurance that covered his mother's treatments, but it also included tuition for him to complete his final year at Carson Institute, while simultaneously joining the symphony as an apprentice pianist. Professor Abramson had welcomed him back to Carson with open arms, working with him to create a schedule that accommodated both his studies and his mother's needs. "Music always finds a way back to those who truly belong to it," the professor had told him during their first lesson together. Now, as he peeked through the curtain at the rapidly filling concert hall, Michael felt a flutter of anxiety in his stomach. What if he froze? What if his fingers failed him? What if, nervous? Victoria appeared beside him in her conductor's attire, her silver hair elegantly styled. Terrified, Michael admitted with a shaky laugh. "Good," she said, surprising him. "The day you stop feeling nervous before a performance is the day you should consider another profession. It means you still care, still understand the privilege of sharing music with others." Michael nodded, grateful for her understanding. "Your mother is here," Victoria continued. "Front row center. I arranged it myself." Michael swallowed hard. Lynn had been doing much better these past months. The doctors were now using the word remission cautiously, and though she still tired easily, her strength was returning day by day. "Thank you," he said. "Oh, and there's someone else you might be interested to know is in attendance," Victoria added with a slight smile. "Thomas Whitaker. He's become quite the patron of the arts recently. His donation to Carson's hardship fund was quite generous." Michael wasn't surprised. After their conversation at the restaurant, Whitaker had indeed made good on his offer to establish a fund for students facing situations similar to Michael's. Though the donation had technically been anonymous, Victoria had her ways of knowing such things. 5 minutes. "Maestro," called the stage manager. Victoria nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Michael. "Remember what we discussed in rehearsal? The orchestra is with you every step of the way. Trust yourself, trust the music, and the rest will follow." As she walked away to prepare for her entrance, Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He thought back to that night at Élysée, how a moment meant to humiliate him had instead set him on a path back to his true calling. The stage manager gave him his cue, and Michael walked onto the stage, the polished black concert grand piano waiting for him like an old friend. The audience applauded as he took his place on the bench, adjusting its height slightly. In the front row he could see his mother smiling proudly, her eyes already glistening with unshed tears of joy. A few seats away sat Rob, Lily, Mr. Hayes, and several other staff members from Élysée, who had all purchased tickets to support him. Behind them in the second row was Thomas Whitaker, who gave Michael a small nod of encouragement when their eyes met. Victoria strode onto the stage then, and the applause grew louder. She bowed to the audience, then turned to the orchestra and finally to Michael, their gazes connecting in mutual understanding. With a subtle nod from her, the performance began. The famous opening chords of the Rachmaninoff Concerto rang out through the hall, Michael's fingers striking the keys with authority and passion. As the orchestra joined in, he felt himself being carried away by the music, all his anxieties fading into the background. There was only this moment, these notes, this conversation between piano and orchestra that had been taking place for over a century, with different voices but the same fundamental truth. The music spoke of struggle and triumph, of darkness giving way to light, of finding beauty even in the midst of pain, all themes that resonated deeply with Michael's own journey. When the final movement reached its conclusion, the audience erupted in applause. Michael stood, bowing first to Victoria, then to the orchestra, and finally to the audience. As he looked out at the sea of faces, some familiar, some strangers, he felt a profound sense of homecoming. This was where he belonged, not because it was glamorous or prestigious, but because it was true. Because when he played, he became fully himself in a way that nothing else allowed. After the performance, the reception area buzzed with conversation as attendees mingled, champagne flutes in hand. Michael stood with his mother, who hadn't stopped smiling since the concert ended. "I'm so proud of you," Lynn said, squeezing his arm. So proud." Before Michael could respond, Victoria approached with a tall, distinguished-looking man beside her. Michael, I'd like you to meet Richard Torres, Dean of the Mercer Conservatory in New York, she said. He was quite impressed with your performance tonight. Richard extended his hand. That might be the understatement of the year, he said warmly. Your interpretation of Rachmaninoff was extraordinary, Mr. Chen. There's a depth and maturity to your playing that's rare in musicians twice your age. Thank you, Michael said, shaking his hand. That means a lot coming from you. He knew of Richard Torres by reputation, a renowned pianist himself before turning to education and arts administration. I'll get right to the point. Richard continued. We have a visiting artist program at Mercer that I think would be perfect for you. 6 months of advanced study, concert opportunities, and a stipend that's quite comfortable. Michael blinked in surprise. In New York? Richard nodded. The program begins next fall, which would give you time to finish your degree at Carson first. And of course, we'd ensure accommodations for both you and your mother. Lynn squeezed Michael's arm again, this time in excitement. New York, she whispered. I'm honored, Michael stammered. But I'd need to think about it. Discuss it with my mother and Victoria. Of course, Richard agreed. There's no rush. Here's my card. Call me when you've had time to consider the offer. He handed Michael a business card, then turned to Lynn. Mrs. Chen, you've raised an exceptional young man. His talent is remarkable, but his character even more so. After Richard moved on to speak with other guests, Lynn looked up at her son with shining eyes. New York, she said again. Michael, this is everything you've worked for. It's a long way from home, he said cautiously. And your treatments are working, she interrupted firmly. And there are excellent doctors in New York, too. She cupped his face in her hands the way she used to when he was a child. This is your moment, Michael. Don't let anything hold you back, especially not me. Before he could respond, Thomas Whitaker approached, champagne in hand. Magnificent performance, he said, raising his glass slightly. Truly magnificent. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker, Michael replied. Thomas, please. He smiled, then turned to Lynn. Mrs. Chen, I presume. It's an honor to meet you. Your son is an extraordinary talent, Lynn shook his hand. Thank you. Though I can't take credit for his musical gifts. Perhaps not, Whitaker conceded. But character is shaped at home, and your son has that in abundance. He looked at Michael thoughtfully. I saw Richard Torres speaking with you. He doesn't approach just anyone, you know. He offered me a place in a program at Mercer Conservatory, Michael said. Whitaker's eyebrows rose. Impressive. Will you accept? I'm not sure yet, Michael admitted. It would mean moving to New York. Whitaker nodded, understanding. Big decision. He sipped his champagne, then added casually, My firm has an office in New York, you know, and our foundation is always looking for worthy causes to support, like promising musicians facing logistical challenges. The implication was clear. If financial concerns were part of Michael's hesitation, Whitaker was offering to help. That's very generous, Michael said carefully. Whitaker waved away his thanks. It's not generosity. It's investment in cultural capital. His expression grew more serious. That night at Élysée, I behaved badly. But in a strange way, I'm grateful for it now. It reminded me that extraordinary talent can exist anywhere in anyone. He glanced around the reception hall. In my world, people often confuse wealth with worth. You helped me remember they're not the same thing. After Whitaker moved on, Michael found himself surrounded by well-wishers, former classmates from Carson, regular customers from Élysée who had recognized him from his piano nights there, and members of the symphony who welcomed him as one of their own. Through it all, one thought kept returning. How different this night was from the one 6 months ago when he had stood frozen beside the restaurant piano. Whitaker's mocking challenge hanging in the air. Later that evening, as the reception wound down, Michael found himself alone at the concert grand piano on the now empty stage. The cleaning staff moved quietly through the hall, gathering discarded programs and empty glasses. He sat down and played a few quiet notes, savoring the rich sound of the instrument in the acoustically perfect space. Victoria's voice came from the shadows at the side of the stage. It sounds different without an audience, doesn't it? She said, walking toward him. More intimate somehow, Michael nodded. It's beautiful. She sat down on the bench beside him. Have you thought about Richard's offer? I haven't had much time, Michael said with a small laugh. But yes, it's tempting. But Victoria prompted, hearing the hesitation in his voice. Michael sighed. 6 months ago, I was a waiter who hadn't touched a piano in almost a year. Now I'm considering moving to New York to study at one of the most prestigious conservatories in the country. He shook his head in disbelief. It's happening so fast. Life often does, Victoria said simply. Especially when you're finally moving in the right direction. What if I'm not ready? Victoria considered this. You weren't ready to play for a restaurant full of wealthy guests that night at Élysée either. But you did it anyway, and look where it led you. Michael smiled at the memory. I was terrified. And magnificent, Victoria added. Just like tonight. She placed a hand on his shoulder. The timing is never perfect, Michael. The question is whether the opportunity feels right. Michael thought about New York, about Mercer, about the doors that were suddenly opening before him. It does, he admitted. But I'm also scared. Good, Victoria said, echoing her words from before the concert. That means it matters. As they sat together in the quiet of the empty concert hall, Michael realized how far he had come since that night when Whitaker had tried to humiliate him. The journey hadn't been easy or straightforward, but each step, even the painful ones, had led him here, to this moment of possibility. Whatever he decided about New York, about Mercer, about the future, one thing was certain. He would never again turn away from his music. It was too much a part of who he was, too essential to his soul. The waiter who had been forced to play piano as a joke was gone. In his place sat Michael Chen, pianist, son, and man of unexpected courage, ready to embrace whatever came next with open arms and an open heart.